morning. On September 6th, 2006, I made one of the best decisions of my life when I hired today's speaker as my office assistant in the library. Professor Hannah Shanks was then a freshman at Greenville College, and I had to get special permission to hire her because she didn't qualify for work-study funding. But Professor Shanks arrived as a freshman with a glowing recommendation from her previous work supervisor at Beardstown Memorial Library. And in her interview, she impressed me with her confidence and her energy. So I thought she must be worth that extra effort, and she was. When I hired Professor Shanks, I hoped that I had found our next reference desk assistant. I quickly discovered that I had. She soon transitioned from office assistant to the library reference desk, where she answered research questions for students and faculty 10 to 12 hours a week until she graduated 4 years later. When Professor Shanks graduated in 2010 with majors in both psychology and urban and cross-cultural ministry, more than one faculty member came to me and asked how it would ever be possible to replace her at the reference desk. In addition to working in the library, I also managed to coax Professor Shanks into serving as my teaching assistant for Core 101, the course that's now UNIV 101. Our section's topic was Middle Eastern fiction and film. And since Professor Shanks had studied Arabic in her spare time for a few semesters at GC, she taught the class some basic phrases and even a song in Arabic that we used to start class most days. Professor Shanks went on from Greenville to complete a master's degree in social work at St. Louis University, specializing in nonprofit administration. She and her husband Dan and their son Ezra still live in St. Louis, where she is active in the politics and life of the city, and where she leads diversity and inclusion training workshops. Just last spring, she published her first book. Here it is. Notice I say first. I'm sure more are to come. It's a creative and it's called This Is My Body. Sorry, I didn't say that. It's a creative and refreshing look at the intersection of motherhood and faith. And it shows just how deeply her faith permeates her whole life existence and experience. As I've watched her from the fall of 2006 until now, I've discovered that Professor Shanks isn't only incredibly energetic and enthusiastic, as I observed in her interview that fall. She's also incredibly perceptive, wise, just, consistent, committed, and funny. I've decided that if she had a late-night talk show, I would stay up late rather than stream it the next day. Yeah. Professor Shanks believes in the power of action. She believes in the power of community. And if you haven't discovered it for yourself already, you'll soon discover that she believes in you. Please welcome Professor Hannah Shanks as she comes to share her wisdom with you this morning.
Thank you. Folks, make friends with people on campus who will write you recommendations like that one. So I have to start by being honest with you all this morning. I haven't been sleeping well lately. Now, it is week 7 in the semester, and I have been hypocritically reminding my classes this week that we professors, we can watch students start making short-sighted decisions and sacrificing things like sleep, eating in a timely and healthy manner, giving your brains an intentional break in the quiet to do the work that they need to do. So it's possible that maybe my uneasiness and lack of sleep right now is just normal week 7 stuff. Maybe it's just midterm. Maybe I'm just not doing as well as I think I should on making sure my body and brain have what they need. But I don't think that's it. I think maybe it's just that I'm coming apart a little bit. The hours of sleep I do get these days are spent under this quilt that we're going to show you. That was handmade by both of my great-grandmothers. Their names were Hazel and Sarah. Hazel did the piecing, and Sarah did the batting and the backing. It wouldn't have been a quilt without both of their contributions. They made it for their grandchildren, my parents. They never knew me, and I never knew them, but the work of their hands keeps me warm at night. It's made out of worn-out towels and old work shirts and scraps. Only the usable pieces stayed, coming together in nonsense shapes until the pattern began to emerge under their deft and skilled hands. Hazel and Sarah took what worked, what was solid and beautiful, and they cut the rest away. And I think about this at night while I'm not sleeping under this blanket. While I'm falling apart underneath it, Hazel and Sarah's work keeps me warm, a testament to the truth that even things that fall apart can be knit back together. Even really messy things like used up tea towels and their hot mess of a great-granddaughter. Anybody who's known me for a little while, it doesn't take long, anybody who's known me for a little while knows that stories are really important to me. In addition to my work here at Greenville as a professor and as a social worker, I'm a writer and a storyteller. And when I'm procrastinating on all of that work, what you'll usually find me is with my nose in a book, or debating the finer plot points of a number of fandoms on the internet with people who are wrong. Maybe about Harry Potter or Star Wars or Doctor Who or The Hunger Games or A Wrinkle in Time, and I'm going to stop myself right there, but know that the list could go on for a really long time because apparently I don't have enough to keep me occupied. But please know that I will roast you in Harry Potter trivia so fast, so trust. But one of the reasons I think I'm always immersing myself in stories, the reason why we all find some story somewhere so compelling, goes beyond just the fact that it's entertainment. I find stories compelling because they're a uniquely human activity here in the world. And I'll go even farther and say that stories are foundational to our experience of shared humanity. We sang about God incarnate, saying heaven isn't complete without us, so I'm going to come down. Well, when God showed up and shared our humanity, God told us stories. And this is why they're so useful for procrastination also, because stories tell us things about ourselves that we need. They tell us who we are and what the junk is going on here. I mean, this is why they're so nice when you don't want to write the paper for me that I've assigned. What's one more? Every person is a mashup of a Disney princess and a Marvel villain. Which one are you, quiz? To just add on top to the pile of the memes and the house sorting and the Myers-Briggs and the strengths and the disc and the Enneagram and your astrology sign and anything else you want to add to that list that helps us figure out who on earth we are and what the junk is going on. By the way, the answer to the Marvel villain and Disney princess is Thanos and Merida about me, if you needed that. It's a good mashup, yeah. The reason why we use these things for fun is because they're really, really fun right up to this tipping point until we kind of over-identify with something a little bit and it hits us right where we live, where we comment under the thing like, I'm so personally attacked right now by this very relatable content. But at the same time, we kind of like that feeling of being known and understood. Stories, big and small, help us figure out who we are. And as Christians, here on Greenville's campus and elsewhere, stories are the material of our faith. What we have in the Bible is a patchwork quilt of family stories handed forward in time to us by our ancestors, something to hold us together, to remind us who we are, to keep us warm in the dark nights to come. Genesis is a birth story. Exodus is a rescue story. Leviticus is a story about learning to live with each other and going through the pain of making way too many rules, and then finding out that rules can't make us love each other. Psalms are stories about being human. Job is the story of suffering and wisdom and radical hope. And the Gospels? Well, those are the stories of Jesus, God with us. These stories as Christians are supposed to tell us who we are, and in broad strokes and narrow, they tell us that we're bearers of God's image in the world, that we're beloved beyond reason, and nothing can shake that. They tell us that we never stop belonging to each other, and that not even death can pull us apart from God or from everybody else we're on this spinning planet with. But remember, I said that stories tell us two things: who we are and what the junk is going on. And while the Bible is pretty unwavering throughout the whole thing about who we are as God's beloved, there's a whole lot of different stories about what the junk is going on in all that patchwork quilt. It's not enough to just know the characters. We have to know the context and the plot. The plots in the Bible are twisty. There's sacrifice and slavery in the name of God. There's bloodshed and patriarchy and racism and sexism and any other kind of ism you want to go looking for. It's not enough to know who we are in the story. We also have to know the plot and the context of what's going on around us, because that's the equation that we need. Who I am and what on earth is happening around me tells me what on earth I should be doing with my life right now. And I think we tell ourselves a lot of different stories in our contexts. Here in America, we have a particular American story that's been woven together through time. The dominant one says that we're exceptional, that we're independent, that personal responsibility is the primary driver of our fate. We tell ourselves in America, and I speak about this from a policy expert standpoint, we tell ourselves in America that poverty is a sign of laziness, or at least a sign that we should be really suspicious about how people in poverty spend those tax dollars. Another story we're telling ourselves in present-day America is that immigrants from Central and South America are a problem, that the adults are dangerous, and that the children should not be with their parents, and that they should be separated and held in tent camps outside Tornillo, Texas, where my friend Reverend Hannah Adair Bonner is keeping watch and praying for them. We tell this story and we get an idea about who we are in that identity. Who we are, people who look like me in that story, Americans, especially people who look like me, we get to be legal and citizen and right. And who they are is illegal and criminals and bad hombres. And yes, if that's the story we tell, if that tells me who I am and who they are, then my course of action is pretty clear. But that is not the Christian story. And I think in the church, I've grown up in the church, and we tell ourselves a lot of things too, especially here in the Midwest. We tell ourselves that we have a job to hold on to certain things with a balled fist. We tell ourselves that being nice is more important than saying something true. We tell ourselves that it doesn't matter who's in charge, and by extension, who their leadership will help or hurt, because God is Lord of all anyway. We tell ourselves it's our job to defend Jesus, as though God incarnate needed a defender. Even though Jesus, when actually defended in the Garden of Gethsemane, told the beloved disciple to sit down and put the sword away. Jesus doesn't need defending. But we tell ourselves it's our job to defend Scripture through logic or reason and offer proofs for why God exists and why then I should do something. I think sometimes we tell ourselves that our faith should be best described by words like unshakable or unwavering or certain. And I gotta be honest with you, that's always been rough for me. When I was here as a reference librarian many years ago, I encountered beloved author Anne Lamott, someone who gives a lot of people light to see by. And what Anne says is that the opposite of faith is not doubt, it's certainty. If I'm certain about something, I don't need a whole lot of faith in it. But we tell ourselves these stories in America and in church and in our dorm rooms and in our disciplines. But the stories we tell are not always synonymous with God's story. God's stories are here to tell us who we are and God's work among us now, God's continued work in our midst, tries to help us answer that second question. What the junk is going on here? I told you I'm not sleeping well these days. I think maybe I'm coming apart a little bit. I also think maybe that's my job as a follower of Jesus Christ right now. See, much like this quilt, my faith is a patchwork that's been handed on to me through the years. Pieces have been cut by some people, sewn together than others, batted and connected by still more. And while the faith that I've been handed is something that I cherish, I have St. Joan of Arc on my wrist right now. She's a person who helped hand forward the faith that I carry. There's something true that I can't shake about this faith that's been handed forward to me. Because not all of the things that I count as faith are synonymous with the gospel of Christ. I've learned that some of the faith that's been handed to me is brittle and like very old fabric. It has to be treated really gently or else it'll crumble. When it comes into contact with the oxygen of the real world, unless I encase it, it's going to come apart. Some of that fabric happened in 1844. In 1844, a man named John Chivington was ordained in the Methodist Church, my tradition, my denomination. And his story of faith is woven closely next to mine, both on the map of history and in geography. Because following his ordination, he worked in the Payson Circuit of Illinois, about 2 hours north of here and about 50 miles from where I grew up, later in a Methodist church. I don't know for sure if John Chivington ever preached in my hometown, but it's certain that he kept company with ministers there because they all rode around and knew each other. Payson is still close enough to my hometown that we played them all the time in high school sports, and I've been there a number of times. And Reverend Chivington, my forerunner in geography and Methodist faith, once wrote the following. And folks, here's the part where I have to say it's about to get hard, but we're going to lean into that. Reverend Chivington wrote, "Damn any man who sympathizes with Indians. I have come to kill Indians and believe it is right and honorable to use any means under God's heaven to kill Indians. Kill and scalp all, big and little. Nits make lice." In 1864, 20 years after his ordination, Reverend John Chivington was Colonel John Chivington, and he led his regiment of several hundred men to an Apache and Cheyenne reservation in the Sand Creek area of the Colorado Territory. That land was given to them following a treaty that was broken, and a second treaty that was broken, and a third treaty that was broken, and they were moved there and stationed at a fort. Colonel Chivington's men marched to that place. They opened fire and continued firing through first a raised white flag and then a raised American flag. An eyewitness on that day estimated that 53 men and 110 women and children were killed. Historical estimates have ranged even farther from that number, placing it as possibly as high as 500. Following this act, Colonel Chivington and the men he commanded mutilated the bodies of Native Americans they'd killed. They removed, sorry, I told you it gets hard. They removed children in utero and created public displays of the genital scalps that they had taken from their victims. They made coin purses out of the body parts. They traveled these things throughout the U.S. as an attraction and sold admission to see them. My great-grandmother Sarah, whose hands made this quilt, were born 10 years after this took place. The authorities of the time condemned these acts in the strongest possible language, but no criminal charges were ever taken against Chivington or any of the soldiers responsible. I don't sleep too well these days. I'm coming apart at the seams. It seems a lot like a lot of what I've known is unraveling, and maybe it's been unraveling for quite some time without me looking. When I learned about John Chivington this April, I wrote, this April at the Festival of Faith and Writing, in fact, at Calvin College, I wrote in my ever-present notebook the following lines: "Is this the faith we pass on? This is the faith we pass on. And if that's the case, I need a pass." You see, my beloved community, there are things woven into the material of our faith, right along with stuff we should keep hold of: love and cherish and family and faith. But next to them, there are threads of barbed wire coursing throughout. And some of us get cut more than others by that. There are things woven into our faith and our churches and our country that should not be. They just should not be. In the name of faith, I've been told repeatedly and often that because I am a woman, I am not fit to carry God's message from a pulpit or position of leadership, or really maybe I'm not supposed to talk a whole lot at all. In the name of faith, especially here in this country, we have argued for slavery, segregation, and subjugation. In the name of faith, we ask each other even now to be careful or judicious about who we share our true identities with. And my beloved community, this should not be. And so in all of this coming apart, I've been trying to pay attention to these stories, the stories that have been handed forward. And I've begun to wonder, what the junk am I supposed to do here, even if I know who I am as a beloved child of God? And the story that emerges is this one. What if our calling is that we're supposed to be people of the unraveling? What if the story we're living now is that it's our job to faithfully unravel all those stray things, the bits of barbed wire, the ways that we've been weaponized against each other, not from Jesus, but from other stuff that got woven in alongside? What if we're supposed to faithfully and courageously unravel all the stray strings that have tangled up around the gospel of Jesus Christ? That story gives me an idea of what it becomes my job to do. It means I have to detangle my hope in God from my deeply embedded hope that maybe, despite what the stories in Leviticus and Judges told me, maybe legislation and the right court justices, those will save me. It means that when I trip over a stray thread in the woven rug of faith that I walk on, it's not my job to pick myself up and keep walking, leaving other people to trip over it behind me. It's my job to bend down, pick it up, follow it back to where it's broken away from the true fabric of faith, and figure out whether that's something to weave back in or whether it's something that needs cut. It means that if I feel like I'm coming apart at the seams and we're lying in bed awake wondering, okay, God, this looks bad, like really bad, like I don't know what the point of this is anymore, kind of bad. Like if this is where the power is in the world, no matter what we've been doing for the last 2,000 years of being your church, maybe all this is kind of pointless, kind of bad. Maybe if I'm feeling that way, or if you're feeling that way, if we are truly people of the unraveling, then maybe it's a sign that I'm taking up in God's work. God with us. God fully vulnerable, Emmanuel, Christ incarnate, who came unabashedly and in God's own words to unravel the kingdoms of this world, to free us from the things that entangle us, not just personal sins, but all things that would indicate that some of us are less important than others. Some of us are less worthy of carrying God's image than others. Some of us carry less right to God's work and redemption in the world than others. So I know some of you aren't sleeping either. And I can't really know from the front of a classroom whether it's because it's week 7 or because there's a lot of other stories pulling you apart at the seams. But if you feel like you're falling apart here in the middle of midterm, please know this. We are people of the unraveling, and we have a lot of work to do. But also hear this good news. We are also people of the resurrection. And nothing we pull apart can ever change that fact. We never stop belonging to God, and we never stop belonging to each other. And this is that which cannot be unraveled. So we can pull and pull and pull on everything else, knowing that that will never go away. I'm tired these days. I'm not always sleeping well, but I have this quilt, and I have this faith. Neither of them are perfect, but they're what I've been handed. I'm thankful, and I'm restless. And now, knowing who I am and what the junk is going on here, it's my job and our job to take up the work of Hazel and Sarah, to take a well-loved and well-used thing and faithfully and courageously trim away all the parts that will not serve us anymore. Like them, we have to learn to take what works, what I said earlier, those things that are still solid and beautiful and healing and true, cut away the rest. It's our job now to take what we've been handed and pull it apart in order to make something worth handing to our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren, people who we will never know, but who through our work we might keep warm at night. It's our job to keep working, even when the pieces look like nonsense, and trust that we are being woven under greater and more skilled and deft hands than our own. The pattern will emerge, and maybe we'll be in alignment with the story that God is weaving. And like Hazel and Sarah, who quilted together, we never do this work alone. We are people of the unraveling, but we are people of the resurrection. And we can never be pulled away from God or from each other, no matter what. No matter what. Receive this benediction from me today. God, we come before you trying to figure out what's going on and taking up the claim, maybe cautiously or maybe eagerly, as your people, the people of the unraveling. Help us to trust and take up your work. Unravel that which ensnares us, and help us to know that even as we are coming apart, we are never alone, and you and your people will take up the work of knitting us back together. Amen. Go and be at peace to love and serve the Lord.